The dawn on Chorus 9 wasn't a sunrise so much as a slow burning bruise across a cloudless sky. Pale amber crept over the jagged cliffs to the east, where black basalt spires jutted like a mouthful of broken teeth. It was the kind of light that looked allergic to warmth, cold, detached. But Riley still stepped out of his field shelter with a mug of rehydrated coffee steaming in one hand and his breath fogging in the other. "Another day in paradise," he muttered, watching a distant flock of hexwings scatter over the canyon's lip. The Terex territory lay beyond that ridge territory that no sane expedition team had ever dared mark on a map, no team but Riley's, and even then, Riley's team had been just him. 3 months into his solitary deployment, Riley had become fluent in Coran silence. The wind carried stories in the dust, the soil preserved prints like ancient carbon paper, and the Terak, massive, quadrupedal apex predators with coal-colored fur and jaws like hydraulic traps were no mystery to him anymore. Well, he thought they weren't. He adjusted his jacket, fingers brushing over the embedded chip in his left forearm. It pinged softly against his portable AI unit, which relayed a daily diagnostic hydration, low, blood glucose, borderline, but vitals otherwise steady. A familiar notification blinked across his goggles. Motion detected. Cam 6. Riley's heart skipped. He tapped the side of the goggles, pulling up the feed. There she was, the mother Terak. A sleek, black monolith of muscle and menace standing over her 3 cubs in the glade near a fallen stone arch. They were about half her size already, 3 months old, and already faster than any drone could track in open terrain. Riley had watched her from afar for weeks, documenting behavior that defied what the Gerat zoologists believed. She licked her cubs, brought them carrion, and nudged them into shady patches during Chorus's relentless heat spikes. He'd named her Brindle, after the faint ash-gray streaks across her hindquarters. It was supposed to be a temporary tag in his field logs, but it had stuck. And the cubs Curio, Brash, and Midge had become more than data points. They were personalities to him now. Curio always sniffed the camera lenses. Brash tackled his siblings constantly. Midge liked rolling in the fungal moss near the old stream bed. So, when the video stream from Cam 6 suddenly shifted, when Brindle snapped, Riley dropped his mug. Ceramic shattered at his feet. The mother lunged, jaws wide, not at prey, but at her own young. Midge yelped, a high-pitched shriek that punched through the audio filters. Curio tried to flee. Brash leapt at her with a cub's ferocity, but Brindle swept him aside like paper in wind. Riley froze. Then something primitive seized his limbs. He ran. No protocol, no sedation kit, no rifle, just a utility belt with a blade and a flare. His feet pounded across jagged rock paths as adrenaline overrode sense. The AI unit chirped something he didn't hear. His breathing grew ragged as he cleared the ridge and looked down on the glade, still 100 meters off. He didn't understand. Why would a mother do this? He vaulted the low ridge wall. 50 meters. Brindle had Brash pinned, her jaws opened. Riley screamed, not a word, just noise, and through the flare. It exploded in front of her snout with a shriek of magnesium and smoke. Brindle recoiled, snarling. Curio and Midge scrambled toward the stone archway. Brash wheezed, blood streaking his fur. Then Brindle turned. Riley had just enough time to realize he was out of options. No cover, no weapon drawn. He pulled the blade free anyway. She charged. The impact took his legs out from under him. He felt ribs crack, the kind of pop that echoed inside the body. Her claws raked across his torso, and hot blood spilled into the dirt. He stabbed blindly, connecting with something soft and wet. Brindle howled and retreated not out of fear, but fury. The second flare went off inches from her eyes. She flinched, and that half-second was enough. Curio barked from the ridge. Brindle hesitated, then bounded toward the call, vanishing into the mist beyond the arch. Riley collapsed, the knife slipping from his grip. He couldn't breathe. Something gurgled in his chest. His left arm wouldn't respond. Blood seeped through his jacket, sticky and warm. The world tilted sideways. He saw Midge crawling toward him, mewling. Brash dragged a foreleg behind him. With the last sliver of strength, Riley activated the beacon in his embedded chip. The signal pulsed once, then he let go. Darkness swallowed everything. Riley didn't dream. There was pain, sharp and cold, then nothing. Later, flashes alien voices, surgical lights, the whir of machines struggling to keep a failing body alive. He never saw the cubs creep into the infirmary, but the guards did. The first sign was a snapped biosensor at 0233 standard, then a motion alert, then silence. By the time Zerat medical staff investigated, the scene was impossible. The cubs, Curio, Midge, and Brash, lay curled like oversized dogs around Riley's bed. One under his arm, one across his legs, the last resting its massive head near the IV stand. No growls, no lunges. But when a nurse so much as stepped past the doorway, Midge bared her fangs. Word spread fast. The Terek cubs had breached the most secure medical outpost on Chorus 9. Apex-rated predators. Juveniles, yes, but still dangerous. The Jarrett ranked them at threat level Gamma Aleph. Even juvenile specimens could eviscerate a fully armored scout in under 30 seconds. No one dared move closer. Command issued a temporary lockdown. Automated feeders were activated. Medications were pumped remotely. The medical AI rerouted all functions to keep Riley's vitals steady without requiring bedside adjustments. For 3 days, the cubs did not leave. And no one not medic, soldier, or technician stepped through the door. The humans had a word for this, one that baffled the Zerat. Imprinting. The cubs didn't see Riley as prey. They saw him as theirs. Riley surfaced slowly, not like waking from sleep, but like crawling out of drowning. His first sensation was heat, not warmth, but smothering, primal heat pressing down on his chest. He tried to move. Couldn't. His eyes stayed closed as awareness returned in jagged fragments, pressure in his side, a persistent beeping somewhere above his head, the rasp of breath that didn't feel like his own. No, wait, it was his, but wrong. Wet, burbling. His chest rose, but only barely. Every inhale felt like dragging nails through broken glass. He groaned softly, cracking open one eye. The ceiling was wrong. He blinked hard. White light filtered through thin panels above him, the kind used in sterile installations. There was no sky, no trees. He was in an infirmary, somewhere safe. Then, something growled beside his ear. He flinched, and the pain almost knocked him unconscious again. Stars exploded behind his eyelids. His hand twitched toward his chest reflexively, but the movement tugged at tubes and wires taped to his skin. IVs. Catheters. Oxygen leads. His whole torso was bandaged tight, layers thick and reinforced with biofoam. Even breathing seemed to agitate something deep inside. He turned his head slowly, and found himself nose to snout with a Terek cub. Not a dream, not a hallucination. Brash blinked at him with massive yellow eyes, his broad shoulders rising and falling with slow, calm breaths. Curio lay just past him, sprawled across the bed's footboard like a furry boulder. Midge snored against the IV stand, her paw twitching in sleep. Riley didn't move, couldn't. A monitor overhead beeped erratically as his heart rate spiked. "Wah, help," he rasped. The word barely carried past his lips, half strangled by the pain, and the nasal cannula jammed in his nostrils. His throat felt like sandpaper soaked in acid. No one came. He forced a swallow. Anyone. From the other side of a clear plaza door, someone pressed a hand against the viewing port. A Jarrett medic. She looked hesitant, terrified even. When her eyes met his, her jaw moved, but no sound passed through the soundproof panel. Brash growled low, head lifting just enough to stare at the medic. Midge stirred. The medic vanished instantly from the window. It dawned on him in stages. The cubs weren't just here. They were guarding him. A ripple of disbelief crawled up his spine. He tried to lift his hand, reaching toward Brash with shaking fingers. The cub sniffed, snorted, then pressed his forehead gently to Riley's ribs just below the thick padding. Riley winced, sucking in a sharp breath, but Brash didn't press harder. The motion wasn't aggressive, it was familiar, seeking reassurance. He remembered now Curio's bark, Brindle's retreat, the pain, so much pain, the flare, the blood. The cubs had followed him, had tracked him for days through terrain even drones couldn't navigate. Because he had interrupted the culling. and now they wouldn't leave. By the next morning, at least what the outpost marked as morning on the rotating schedule, the entire Gerat command unit was in full containment protocol. Engineers had sealed off the hallway. 2 combat medics were stationed outside the infirmary in full riot gear, though neither dared step through the reinforced door. Inside, Riley had managed to speak a little more. A nurse patched a communication link through the wall speaker to minimize risk. Her voice, filtered and tense, echoed in the quiet room. "Mr. Riley, I need to assess your pain scale. Can you respond vocally?" He coughed, immediately regretting it. 9, maybe 10. "Your blood oxygen is low. We're increasing your flow rate slightly." One of the cubs grumbled as the machine clicked beside his bed. Curio eyed it suspiciously but didn't move. The voice returned. "You need a full scan. There are signs of fluid accumulation, but we can't send anyone in." "Yeah," Riley wheezed. "I noticed." There was a pause. Then, quieter. "I've been ordered to ask you if you believe the cubs are going to harm you." Riley turned his head slowly to look at Brash, who was licking one of Riley's bandaged arms with delicate, deliberate motions. Midge was curled near his legs, her body pressed close to the warming pads. Curio had nosed his way under the blanket, only his tail sticking out. "They think I'm family," he muttered. "They think I saved them." A longer silence. "Understood," the voice finally said. "I'm going to request clearance to use a diagnostic drone." "Fine," he murmured. "But tell them not to be stupid. If they try to drag them off, it won't end well." The next 3 days were a masterclass in medical improvisation. A xenobiologist named Dr. Venar, 4-eyed, toweringly tall, always grim, delivered updates by holoscreen from the outpost's lab. He didn't mince words. "You interrupted a culling ritual. Most likely instinctual. The mother removes the weakest to ensure the strongest survives. It's efficient, brutal, but effective." "So, she wasn't being cruel," Riley whispered. "No, she was following evolutionary hardwiring. You threw off the pattern." "And now?" Venar adjusted his coat. "Now they see you as the vector of their survival, the alpha. Possibly maternal proxy, depending on how their bonding cycle interprets proximity and scent during stress events." "I was bleeding out." "Yes, you were also the loudest, brightest, most mobile thing between them and death. That tends to leave an impression." Riley chuckled weakly, regretted it instantly. "Great. From here forward, you're part of their pack structure." Riley blinked. "How long does that last?" Venar looked down at his data slate. "We don't know. Terrak behavior has never been observed past the culling stage. Their juvenile development is undocumented." "Of course it is. We also don't know what happens if they're forcibly separated from their bonded figure." Riley looked at the cubs again. Midge snored softly against the oxygen pump. Curio had drooled all over the blanket. Brash was watching him like a sentry. "Then you're not taking them," he said flatly. Venar raised a brow. "Mr. Riley, you're not removing them. You'll get me a drone. You'll get me antibiotics and whatever rehab plan you had before the Apex babies arrived. But you are not pulling them out of this room. Eh? And if Command disagrees?" Riley leaned back slowly, breathing through the pain. "Then I hope Command has a better plan for not dying." The cubs grew fast. By the start of the second week, Brash could reach the top of the vitals monitor by stretching. Midge had knocked over the IV stand twice, and Curio had learned how to operate the door panel only to be blocked by the emergency lockdown protocol. Still, they didn't attack, not once. They snapped if someone got too close to Riley. They growled when the door hissed open, but to him, they were calm, protective, almost gentle. That didn't stop the outpost from drafting contingency plans. "Containment sedatives," Dr. Venar informed him bluntly. "Command has approved chemical suppression if they become a threat." "They haven't, they won't. You're putting your faith in instincts we don't understand." "I'm putting faith in what I saw," Riley said. "They're not pets, but they chose me. That has to mean something." Venar's eyes narrowed. "Or you just delayed their extinction." "Maybe," Riley admitted, "but they're alive, and so am I." The next morning, Riley tried to sit up on his own for the first time. The pain was blinding. His ribs hadn't fully healed, his lungs still hissed under pressure, and the moment he shifted, his vision doubled. But Brash nudged under his arm, lifting gently. Midge leaned against his hip. Curio nosed his hand until it curled into fur. Together, inch by agonizing inch, Riley sat upright. He was drenched in sweat by the end of it, breathing hard, weak, shaking. But upright. One of the guards watching from the reinforced window muttered, "This is insane." Another replied, "This is human." Riley's second walk happened 14 days after the culling. It took him 17 minutes to get from the bed to the bathroom and back, a distance of barely 5 meters. His muscles twitched like live wires under healing skin. Every breath still carried an edge, the remnants of collapsed lung and fractured ribs hissing like stubborn machinery. But the cubs walked with him. Not ahead, not behind. With him. Brash limped in sync with his pace, matching Riley's shuffling steps, exactly still favoring the leg injured during Brindle's strike. Midge trotted beside them with her head low, occasionally bumping Riley's thigh when his knees buckled. Curio circled the path anxiously, whining when Riley paused too long or reached for the wall to steady himself. The medics watching through the wall's transparent panel recorded every second. By the time Riley collapsed back into bed, gasping and drenched in sweat, the cubs were already nudging blankets over his legs. They didn't leave his side for hours. A week later, the Gerat command summoned him for review virtually, of course. No one wanted to be in the same room with the cubs, especially not now that they'd begun growing permanent canines. Riley sat propped in bed with a stiff shoulder brace and pressure bandage across his ribs, still gaunt from rapid muscle loss. The med team had been cautiously impressed by his progress, but their scans were blunt. He was at least 2 months from full recovery. The cubs lounged nearby as the hollow screen flickered to life. A trio of Gerat officials appeared, one military, one scientific, and one with the flinty eyes of a diplomat. "We appreciate your survival, Mr. Riley," the military one began, her voice clipped and formal. "But your condition and the security threat cannot persist indefinitely." Riley didn't answer immediately. His hand rested on Curio's back, feeling the slow, steady rise and fall of his breathing. "The cubs remain volatile," the scientist added. "We have confirmation they've reached Phase 2 development. Their mass will double again within the next month." "I know," Riley said hoarsely. "They're still manageable." "For you, perhaps," the diplomat interjected, "but not for our personnel. You've created an ecological anomaly, a biological inconsistency. These creatures are not supposed to exist beyond the cull." Riley looked straight into the camera. "They exist because I got in the way." "Yes," the military officer replied coldly. "And now the survival of 3 apex predators threatens the safety protocols of this outpost." "Then move them," Riley said. "Set up a sanctuary, somewhere isolated, off-grid." The scientist shook his head. "The cubs would not survive relocation without you. Their imprinting cycle is incomplete. Separation could trigger behavioral collapse or unpredictable aggression." Riley shifted forward, wincing as he did. "Then I go with them." The diplomat arched a brow. "You're offering yourself as liaison?" "No," Riley said. "I'm offering myself as parent." Silence fell. Brash yawned, revealing several inches of emerging fang. The cub curled up again and thumped his tail against Riley's ankle. "Unorthodox," the scientist muttered. "Extremely," the military added. But the diplomat's expression turned calculating. "There are precedents, cross-species behavioral interventions, xenobonding under duress." "You'll need a name for the clause," Riley muttered, leaning back. "Might as well call it what it is, a sanctuary clause." "And the risk?" the military asked. "If one of them turns on you?" "Then I'll know I failed," Riley said quietly. "But I don't think they will." They didn't have a better option. 3 days later, Riley was wheeled through the hangar on a reinforced gurney. The outpost guards stood at full alert, but the cubs trotted calmly alongside the stretcher, tails swaying in perfect synchronization. Each wore a collar, not a restraint, but a biosensor band fitted with pheromone diffusers and neural stress indicators. It was more for the Gerat's comfort than the cubs. As Riley passed, medics and soldiers alike fell silent. A pair of junior staffers whispered in hushed tones, "He's the one who fought a Mother Tarak with a flare? Cut her with a utility knife." bled out right there. And now he's raising her cubs? He is the culling. Riley didn't speak. His lungs ached, his shoulder throbbed, and every bump in the corridor sent shocks through his ribs. But he kept one hand draped over the side of the stretcher, palm open. Brash walked beside it the whole way, brushing against his fingers. The shuttle to the new sanctuary, a climate-controlled installation deep in the temperate canyons of southern Chorus, was outfitted specifically for this purpose. Custom habitats, triple reinforced walls, no sharp corners, and isolation from civilian traffic. If anything went wrong, containment protocols could be triggered instantly. The first night, nothing did. Riley slept 12 hours under the soft hum of filtered air, with the cubs sprawled across the room like oversized watchdogs. He woke only once, coughing up a clot of dried blood. His chest still burned, but it was easing. That morning, for the first time, he fed them by hand. It wasn't easy. They didn't understand the feeding troughs. They tore the packaging apart. Curio tried to eat the tray. Midge licked the nutrient paste off Riley's hands like it was a game. He laughed. For the first time since the Glade, he really laughed. Recovery was slow, as predicted. The bone fractures took 6 weeks to stabilize under regenerative splints, and even then, Riley walked with a limp. Physical therapy consumed hours each day, grueling, frustrating hours where his body refused to do what his mind demanded. But the cubs adapted with him. Brash still mirrored his gait. Curio brought him tools, sometimes the right ones. Midge developed a habit of lying behind him during balance exercises, preventing falls without being told to. When a muscle group failed, when Riley collapsed into the padded flooring and growled in pain or frustration, they lay beside him, quietly. The way animals do when they know someone is hurting, and the only answer is presence. Sometimes, that was enough. 3 months after his first walk, a team of alien behavioral specialists visited the sanctuary. They stayed behind armored glass, recording everything. No one tried to approach. Riley was outside on the training deck, using a walker frame to traverse the incline path. It was slow going, his right hip still barked like an angry joint every time he shifted, but he kept moving. Brash walked beside him, no limp anymore. Bigger now, his head reached Riley's waist. Midge patrolled the perimeter, alert but relaxed. Curio perched near the water basin, playing with the submerged filtration spouts. When Riley stopped to catch his breath, Brash leaned in. Not to support him, just to be near. One of the scientists muttered through the monitor, "They should be killing him by now." Another replied, "They think he's theirs." That evening, a junior Girat caretaker asked him the question no one else had dared. "Do you ever wish it hadn't happened?" Riley sat in the habitat's observation alcove, one leg stretched out stiffly, an old Tarak claw from Brindle's strike resting like a paperweight on his journal. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he watched Midge drag an old training cone toward the others. Brash barked. Curio pounced. They tumbled together in a blur of fur and harmless nips. "Sometimes," Riley said, eventually, "when the pain hits hard, or I can't sleep, when I remember her eyes." "The mother?" He nodded. "She wasn't evil, she was just being what nature made her. And I wasn't supposed to be part of it." "But you were." "I was." The caretaker hesitated. "And now they're yours." "No," Riley said quietly. "Now I'm theirs." The cubs weren't cubs anymore. By the 8th month, Brash weighed nearly 200 kilograms. Midge had outgrown the shelter's internal doors and began sleeping outdoors beneath the observation platform. Curio, always the most unpredictable, had figured out how to activate pressure locks with a precise application of his snout and a well-timed paw. He used it to open storage units Riley wasn't even authorized to access. They were juveniles now, biologically speaking, still growing, still playful, but their teeth could shear titanium mesh, and their bones were dense enough to snap reinforced railing during a scuffle. The sanctuary had doubled its internal safety protocols, though not because the cubs had done anything wrong. It was because the outside world had started to pay attention. Alien researchers cycled through on rotation, xenobiologists, ethologists, military observers. They came with clipboards, drones, and every variation of caution tape the Girat bureaucracy could print. Most watched from afar, some asked questions. 1. A junior analyst from the Interstellar Ethics Committee made the mistake of calling them dangerous specimens in Riley's presence. He didn't raise his voice, didn't threaten. He simply turned, leaned on his cane, and said, "Call them that again, and I'll show you how dangerous I am." The analyst didn't come back. The first public trial of the sanctuary clause came unexpectedly. A routine survey team landed on Chorus 9's southern belt, 200 kilometers west of the sanctuary. Their camp was destroyed overnight, rations torn open, tents shredded, gear scattered. A rogue Terrak female, unmated, likely expelled from her own litter decades ago. The two surviving researchers were missing for almost 18 hours before a rescue drone found them, pinned under a collapsed ledge with fractured limbs and no signal coverage. They were within 20 minutes of bleeding out when the Cubs found them. No, Riley corrected himself later, not Cubs. His pack found them. The sanctuary's perimeter had detected the commotion and sounded an alert. Before the drones could deploy, Brash and Midge were gone, vaulting the south enclosure and racing into the wilderness like shadows over stone. Curio stayed behind, circling the area in tight, anxious loops until Riley made it to the lookout tower. By the time Gerard's search and recovery arrived, with exomedics and security in tow, Brash was standing over the injured researchers, tail swaying lazily, while Midge dragged a thermal blanket from the wreckage and laid it across the smaller victim. No growls, no blood. Just two scared humans and two Terrak juveniles standing watch like they'd done it 100 times. The incident made the networks within hours. A month later, Riley was summoned to testify before the Interstellar Preservation Council. The trial chamber aboard the Concordance Spire station was cold and bright, with a central platform that floated above concentric tiers of delegates. Alien languages scrolled across his ocular feed like ticker tape. Every eye, whether compound, segmented, or single-lensed, was locked on Riley. He stood slowly, no cane anymore, but his limp remained and activated the data node on his wrist. A hollow projection of the Cubs flickered to life, playing, eating, resting with their massive heads in his lap. A low murmur filled the chamber. He cleared his throat. "I didn't ask for this," he said. "I wasn't trying to prove anything. I just saw something I couldn't ignore." He let that hang in the air. There are things on Chorus 9 we still don't understand, patterns older than our science, but that doesn't mean they're beyond compassion. He tapped the node again. Footage of the rescue effort played Brash's pacing, Midge's blanket delivery, the steady, watchful eyes. They were raised in violence, taught that only the strong deserve to survive, and still, they chose to protect. Not just me. Anyone. A diplomat from the Kelthi Council clicked his pincers skeptically. "You propose we allow apex predators to be housed freely among fragile species, based solely on your anecdotal influence?" Riley turned to face him. "No, I propose we recognize that evolution isn't finished, that behavior isn't destiny, that sometimes it just takes someone stupid enough to throw a flare at a monster to change the outcome." Laughter rippled across several delegations. Even the Kelthi diplomat chittered softly, which Riley had learned meant something like a grudging smirk. After a full hour of deliberation, the ruling came down. The sanctuary clause would stand. The Cubs would remain protected. Studied, yes, but under Riley's authority. No forced relocations, no terminations. The vote was nearly unanimous. Riley returned to Chorus 9 to find the Cubs waiting by the shuttle pad. They nearly bowled him over Brash, tackling him with a chest-thumping nudge that left his shoulder bruised. Midge yelped excitedly and dropped a fist-sized rock at his feet. Curio pressed his forehead against Riley's thigh and let out a long, relieved exhale. It was the only time Riley ever let himself cry in front of them. He knelt slowly, ignoring the sharp pull in his hip, and whispered, "I'm home." Life settled into something strange, but steady. Riley woke each morning to paw prints across his sleeping platform, his boots chewed slightly at the toes, and the distant thump of Curio trying to scale the outer cliff wall for the 5th time that week. He drank recycled coffee on the observation deck, with Midge curled around his ankles and Brash dozing under the sun. Occasionally, dignitaries visited. Soldiers, scientists, even one surreal visit from a high-ranking Terran diplomat who offered Riley a commendation for interventionary heroism. He declined the medal. Instead, He framed the shredded cover of his old field journal, the one soaked in blood and torn in half during the attack. It hung above the central door of the sanctuary's control room. One day, while brushing down Brash's winter coat, Riley caught himself humming. Not any song in particular, just a tune his father used to whistle while fixing fence posts back home. Brash flicked his ears and let out a low, curious chirp. Riley laughed. "Don't look at me like that. You're practically a puppy now." Midge barked from the other side of the habitat. Curio promptly tackled her. He watched them tumble through the grass, their roars echoing off the cliffs, and thought of the first time he'd seen Brindle in the glade. The blood, the terror, the flare, and the knife. And the choice pure instinct, no plan of stepping between something wild and something worse. And somehow, surviving. Not because he was strong, or fast, or brave, but because, in that moment, he couldn't not act. Years later, when the first batch of hybrid behavioral texts on the Terek were published, Riley's chapter came last. Not technical, not analytical. Just a page titled Caretaker, with a single line beneath it. "They weren't mine because I saved them. They were mine because I stayed." The file was translated into 73 galactic dialects. And every time a new expedition launched to study predatory behavior on frontier worlds, the final checklist included one new line, flagged in red. "Do not intervene during culling rituals. Unless your name is Riley." He never walked alone again. Not on Chorus 9. Not anywhere.